At Sophie's birthday party, I wasn't on the guest list. I came because Mom begged me to. Just show your face, she said. Don't cause drama. So, I did. I wore the only decent dress I had left after selling half my closet to pay off student loans. I brought a necklace I'd saved up for, gold-plated, simple, but beautiful. Sophie's birthstone, hand-wrapped. A real gift, from the only sister she ever had. She opened it in front of everyone. Looked at it, then looked at me and laughed. She turned to the crowd and said, "Ah." Emma tried. Then she tossed it. Tossed it into the champagne fountain. People laughed. Her fiancé said, "Next time, just Venmo her $5. And my mother whispered, "Why would you even bring something like that?" That was the moment I stopped being the bigger person. Because while they were laughing, I was watching. And while Sophie was busy planning her wedding and posting fake deep quotes on Instagram, I was acquiring her fiancé's collapsing company under an alias. Filing trademarks, redirecting clients, freezing contracts. 2 weeks later, her fiancé walked into a board meeting and learned he no longer had majority control. 3 days after that, Sophie learned her dream wedding had been cancelled because the catering, venue, and floral vendors were all prepaid by a shell company. Mine, she threw away a necklace. I threw away her life plans. I'm Emma Carter. And this is what happens when the one you humiliate knows how to use silence, contracts, and your own arrogance against you. Before I share every detail, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been treated like garbage by the people who should have loved you, hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. Monday mornings at Silver Care Services were usually predictable. Reports, updates, maybe a new training policy to keep up with state compliance. But that morning, on the 17th floor of our glass-paneled headquarters in downtown Seattle, nothing felt routine. The air was too still. Lauren's smile was too composed. Something in her eyes, calm, gleaming, made my stomach turn. The boardroom was full. Executives, care team leaders, operations managers, even representatives from Centurion Care and Rosiel Living. Our two largest partners sat lined along the conference table. I, Emma Carter, sat at the left of the woman I once thought I knew better than anyone, Lauren Carter. My older sister. My co-founder. My biggest mistake. She clicked her pen twice, a subtle signal, then leaned forward and said, "Before we move into quarterly numbers, there's one final item on the agenda. Leadership restructuring." Heads turned. I didn't blink. She reached into her leather binder and slid a white envelope toward me, stopping it perfectly at the edge of my notebook. "Emma," she said lightly, almost sweetly, "you've done so much for Silver Care. But we're moving in a different direction. We've decided we no longer need someone in your role. Not a task executive." The word burned. She looked at me like she wanted me to break, to cry, to plead, to lose composure in front of every partner and department head who had ever admired me. She wanted to reduce me to the help. I felt my jaw tightening, but I kept it steady. I stared at the envelope. Severance. I assumed. She hadn't even bothered to write my name on it. I stood up slowly. Not abruptly. Not in protest. But with precision. I unpinned my staff badge, laid it gently beside the envelope, and scanned the room. Some people looked away. A few had tears in their eyes. Most sat frozen. Sophie Miller, our director of operations, and my longtime friend, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how deep it ran. I turned to Lauren. "Silver Care will collapse within 24 hours, I said. "You might hold the deed, but the soul of this company, it's walking out that door with me." A few gasps rippled down the table. Lauren's lips twitched, but her smile faltered. I walked to the door, then paused and turned back, catching Sophie's eye. "Check the Centurion contract," I told her. "Specifically the addendum dated February 12th. You'll find it illuminating." That was my final gift to Lauren, a ticking clock she didn't know was already counting down. As I exited the room, I didn't feel small. I felt clear. Calm. Focused. I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking towards something I had already been preparing for. 6 months before the envelope, before the staged humiliation, I started noticing the signs. Subtle, at first. A missing invite here. A policy document accidentally skipped in my inbox. Then my clearance to access financial forecasting files was downgraded. When I asked Lauren, she smiled and said, "Just taking pressure off your plate, Em. You've earned a break." But I knew that tone. It was the same syrupy softness she used when she lied to our parents as kids. Soon after, Jake Miller arrived. Young. Charismatic. His title? Director of Operational Innovation. A made-up role, if I ever heard one. But Lauren paraded him around like he was the second coming of Silicon Valley. She started sending him in my place to meetings I had established. Partners I had spent years cultivating. Worse, I noticed something chilling. Our company brochures, investor decks, public-facing materials, all stripped clean of my name. No mention of me as co-founder. It was as if I had never existed. That night, I stayed late in the office. Long after the building emptied. I accessed our legal records quietly, with gloves. The amended corporate charter had been filed 3 weeks earlier. The section listing founders now named Lauren Carter as the sole originator of Silver Care Services. My name was gone. I stared at the screen, willing it to change. Then I printed the document, slid it into a black folder, and locked it in the safe beneath my desk. I didn't cry. Not then. 2 days later, Sophie flagged me down in the parking garage. She was trembling. It was raining, and neither of us had umbrellas. "He's not here to support you," she whispered. "Jake. He's replacing you." I heard them on the phone with Peak Pulse Holdings. That stopped me cold. Peak Pulse was a private equity firm with a history of gutting elder care operations for profit. If Lauren was talking to them, it meant she was planning a buyout. And she needed me gone to make the deal clean. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, opened a blank notebook, and began redesigning Silver Care's entire operational blueprint. Not as an employee, but as a sovereign entity. I mapped out partnerships, made calls, and quietly formed a second LLC, Evergreen Wellness. I drafted alternate service agreements and began moving my influence and relationships into safe hands. In public, I played the role Lauren expected. I smiled. I signed reports. I said yes at just the right volume. But behind the curtain, I built something Lauren couldn't touch. I met with every senior care provider we serviced. Not officially. Not under Silver Care. But over coffee and nursing. Homes and PDA-style town halls. I spoke with families. I listened to caregivers. I found out who trusted me because of who I was, not my title. Lauren thought she was playing chess. But she forgot I invented the game. By the time she slid that white envelope across the table, I wasn't shocked. I was prepared. Because 6 months earlier, I had already begun the slow, deliberate act of reclaiming everything she tried to steal. Not with noise. Not with vengeance. But with structure. With foresight. And with names, faces, and stories Lauren never bothered to learn. She could erase my name from a document. But she could never erase it from the people. After Sophie warned me in the garage, I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I lay awake thinking of every blueprint I'd drafted by hand. Every family I had stood beside as they buried someone they loved. Silver Care was never just a company. It was a promise, but promises, I learned, are breakable, especially when signed away behind closed doors. So I began building a quiet escape hatch. I registered Evergreen Wellness LLC under my own name. On paper, it was a third-party provider. A peripheral partner of Silver Care. But in practice, it became my shield. I used Evergreen to sign parallel agreements with our largest clients, Centurion Care, Rosiel Living, Magnolia Grove. Contracts with specialized language that placed continuity of care under my discretion. Every clause was airtight. My next move was people. I reached out to the caregivers who had stayed through floods, viruses, overtime weekends. The ones who showed up at 5 a.m. with their own coffee because we couldn't afford to stock the break room yet. I contacted them one by one. No group emails. No signatures. Just quiet check-ins. Eventually, I invited 42 of them to a private Slack group labeled Legacy Network. On the surface, it was just a place to share experiences. But I knew they understood. If Silver Care ever changed leadership or core philosophy, the group would be activated. Not to revolt, but to migrate, together. Meanwhile, Jake Miller became bolder. In a Wednesday strategy meeting, he pulled me aside afterward and said we needed to synchronize client care systems. His tone was casual. Friendly. But his eyes were too curious. "I'll need you to transfer the entire database of high-risk clients," he said. "You're the only one with access to the behavioral logs." I smiled. "You'll need my authorization. And I don't sign blank pages." He blinked. Forced a chuckle. Then walked away with a polite nod. But I saw it, the first crack in his polished confidence. Lauren, however, took a different approach. A week later, she invited me to dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant in Queen Anne. The kind of place that served truffle butter with their sourdough and expected you to know your wines without asking. She arrived in a navy silk dress. Hair pinned tight. She smiled like none of it had happened. "Emma," she said, clinking her glass. "I've been thinking. You shouldn't be bogged down by day-to-day operations. You've earned something more elegant. A legacy title. Senior Strategic Advisor, perhaps." I stared at her. "That's not a real position." "It could be," she said. "You'd still get a generous package. No stress. No meetings. You just show up. At galas, give quotes to the press, like a mascot." "A figurehead," she corrected gently. One we can both be proud of. I set my fork down. You want me visible, but voiceless. Present, but powerless. Her smile didn't falter. She lifted her glass again and said quietly, weak women get written out of history. You don't want to be one of them. I didn't respond. I just reached into my purse and slid a folded napkin across the table. On it, I'd written 3 words, Evergreen Controls Contracts. She read it. Then she blinked. Then she laughed. But that laugh didn't last long. The morning after Lauren publicly dismissed me, I didn't go to war. I went quiet. I stayed home. Made a proper breakfast. Lit a candle. And waited that I knew what was coming. Not the paper blueprints, but the human ones. The gaps that couldn't be filled with PR statements or replacement hires. By 9:15 a.m., the Silvercare dispatch system began crashing. In Ballard, no caregivers showed up. In Bellevue, an elderly client waited 3 hours for her insulin injection. In Tacoma, a family called the police when no one answered the emergency line. I didn't answer my phone. But Sophie texted me at 10:03 a.m. with a single line, they're calling this a system outage, but it's not. It's an Exodus. By noon, Centurion Care faxed a termination letter. At 2 p.m., Rosiel Living followed. Goodhands Sr. sent their notice just before dinner. In 36 hours, Silvercare lost nearly half its active revenue. Caregivers resigned en masse. My phone lit up with quiet apologies. Screenshots. Resignation letters. Photos of tearful goodbyes. With clients. Some told HR they needed a break. Others simply left the building and never returned. No protest. No chaos. Just silence. Jake tried to salvage order, but he didn't know who to call. He had never changed linens at 3 a.m. He didn't have the right numbers. He didn't even speak the language. Lauren called me 3 times that morning. 5 more by afternoon. No voicemails, only Sophie reached me. Emma, she wrote. She's unraveling. I don't know what your endgame is. But you're scaring her. And honestly, you're scaring me too. Are you okay? I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. But because I had already said everything that needed to be said. Silvercare would fall. Not because I sabotaged it. But because they built a tower on my shoulders, and then tried to cut off my legs. That afternoon, I went to a little cafe on Pine Street. I ordered a cappuccino and lasagna. My mom used to make lasagna when I was upset. Back when she didn't know how else to fix things. I brought my book, Man's Search for Meaning. The words felt heavier now. Toi? Pain wasn't meant to be avoided. It was meant to be understood. While I sipped my coffee, I saw my name appear on a trending Reddit thread. A mother had written, Emma Carter once visited my dad in the ICU when his caseworker forgot to show. She brought him soup. She made sure his cat was rehomed. I didn't see her name on the Silvercare site anymore. Does anyone know what happened to her? Underneath, replies poured in. I heard she left. Was she forced out? She was the only reason. I trusted them. A local blogger posted a piece titled Silvercare Without Its Soul. It didn't go viral. But it didn't need to. The right people saw it. And that was enough. By evening, I turned off my phone and watched the light fade through the window. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't plotting. I was breathing, because sometimes, the loudest revenge is silence. 3 days after the collapse began, the doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. I had been up since 6, sipping coffee in silence, rereading the same page over and over. I knew someone would come. I just hadn't expected it to be Sophie Miller and Ethan Brooks. Sophie looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her blazer was wrinkled. Eyes bloodshot. Ethan stood behind her, holding a folder like an offering. I opened the door without a word. They stepped inside. Sophie spoke first. Emma, we made a mistake. A big one. And we're here because Silvercare is crumbling. The systems are failing. Staff are leaving faster than we can call replacements. Clients are panicking. Jake hasn't shown up in 2 days. And Lauren's locked herself in her condo. I said nothing. I let her speak. Because admitting it was part of the consequence, they had followed Lauren blindly. Now they were watching the walls fall and Ethan cleared his throat. We need you back. He said. Please, we don't know how much longer the contracts will hold. Everyone's looking to you. Even the clients are calling your name. I didn't speak right away. I just stood still in the doorway, staring at the weight in their eyes. Then I turned and walked into the living room. I opened the bottom drawer of the side cabinet and pulled out the thin black folder I had kept close and quiet through every storm. Inside were the contracts I had signed with our key partners, Centurion Care, Rosiel Living, Magnolia Grove, and others. Each was legal. Each binding. Each executed through Evergreen Wellness LLC with clauses so specific they were almost poetic. The services would remain in effect only if I, Emma Carter, held direct operational oversight. The heartbeat of every agreement was tied to my presence. I laid the folder gently on the coffee table. Read them. Sophie opened it first, her breath catching at page 2. Ethan leaned in behind her, his hands now shaking more than the folder. They never mentioned Evergreen, he said. His voice was soft, almost ashamed. They wouldn't have, I replied. It wasn't built for them. It was built for protection. Those contracts don't exist without me. They looked up at me with that silent desperation people get when they realize they've placed trust in the wrong person for too long. I'm willing to return, I said. But not crawling, and not as the woman your CEO tried to erase. Sophie nodded slowly. Her eyes were already wet. My conditions are simple, I told them. I want 50% equity in Silver R. A seat on the board. My title restored, Chief Director of Specialized Care. $15 million in damages for breach of founding agreement and personal harm. And one more thing. They waited, barely breathing. A public press conference, I said. Where Lauren states clearly and on record that I co-founded Silver R and was instrumental in its creation and success. Sophie exhaled like the air had been knocked out of her. Lauren won't agree to that. She will, I replied, because without me, those contracts expire in 72 hours, and right then, as if summoned by the weight of truth, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was. Lauren. Her hair knotted. Mascara streaked, wearing a sweatshirt that hung off her shoulders like a shell. She pushed past me like it was still her right. You can't do this, she snapped. You can't just take everything from me. Silver R is mine. I didn't answer. I walked calmly to the living room, picked up the folder, and handed it to her. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. Her skin went pale. Her lips quivered. You tricked me, she whispered. No, I said. I protected what mattered. She looked at Sophie. At Ethan. Hoping someone would jump to her defense. But they looked away. I'll never forgive you for this, she said. You don't have to. She sat down like something inside her had finally broken. Then, slowly, she picked up the pen and signed. Not because she wanted to. Because she had no choice. That apartment on Capitol Hill, the one that had sheltered my exile, became the place where power returned to truth. For 3 days after, Lauren vanished. No statements. No meetings. Just silence. Then, on the third morning, I got a flood of alerts. She was speaking. A live stream had gone up. Lauren Carter breaks her silence. I watched it in full. She stood behind a podium in a navy dress, reporters circling her like wolves. Her voice cracked just enough to seem fragile. Her words were carefully chosen, her pain carefully lit. My sister Emma, she said, was always the favorite. My mother praised her, paid for her college. I worked 2 jobs at 17 while she studied philosophy. She dreamed while I folded brochures. And now she's taken everything. Legal tricks. Backdoor contracts. She forced me to sign away my life's work. She held up a yellowed envelope, our mother's words scrawled across it. She quoted the line I had never forgotten. Emma has leadership potential, you do not, Lauren. She said. She carried those words like a stone for decades. And now they had turned to something darker. By nightfall, the internet erupted. Emma Carter is a traitor. Business genius or not, betrayal is betrayal. Families don't destroy each other like this. Centurion Care requested a formal clarification. Staff murmured. A petition circulated demanding an audit of Silver R's founding history, and for the first time, I hesitated. I sat in the dark of my apartment, the glow of the screen flickering off my face, and I asked the question I had buried beneath control and strategy and rage. Had I gone too far? Had I protected what I built only to destroy something no press conference could rebuild? Then the email came. Anonymous. Subject line, blood doesn't lie. The body you'll pay for dividing us.it had no name. No signature. Just poison. And that night, as I replayed Lauren's speech, I realized she hadn't lied. Not really. She had twisted the truth into a shape that still fit her pain. She was reaching for sympathy. For a version of herself the world could mourn, and in a way, I understood. The next day, while looking for a receipt in the back drawer of my apartment, I found a yellow envelope with my name written in my mother's fading script. It was brittle, the ink bleeding slightly at the corners. I opened it with shaking hands. Emma. If you're reading this, it means I didn't say enough before I left. I know I praised you more. I saw you as strong. Visionary. But in doing that, I forgot Lauren. She was always watching. And she hurt more deeply than she let on. I tried to prepare you both for the world, but I failed. The paper trembled in my fingers. The silence between us suddenly had a name. Legacy. Favoritism. Misplaced love. My sister hadn't become cruel overnight. She had grown in the shadows while I stood in the light. It didn't excuse her. But it explained something I had never dared to ask. 2 days later, the board called a special meeting. Harold Bennett spoke first. Emma, we can't remain neutral. People are confused. Clients are watching. This isn't just about your reputation anymore, and he was right. This had stopped being personal a long time ago. That night, Sophie arrived. At my door. She brought a file of internal complaints. Caregivers overworked. Policies twisted into punishments. Quiet abuse masked as order. She handed me the folder, and her voice cracked. I was afraid of losing my job. Now I'm more afraid of losing what this company used to mean. Ethan called too. He had heard about the letter. He told me to share it, not to retaliate. To reconcile. I hesitated until I saw the video. A group of longtime staff had gathered in a cafe on Lake Union. Someone filmed it quietly. They spoke of memories. Of nights I sat beside patients. Of the early days when we had nothing but heart, and then Margaret spoke. Her voice frail, wrapped in a shawl. Emma Carter stayed with me the night my husband died. She didn't clock out. She didn't leave. She stayed. That's the kind of woman I want running a care company. I cried. Not from pain, but release. I didn't have to prove anything. I had already lived it. So I stood up. I didn't book a hotel or a ballroom. I asked the staff to clear the community room, the same one where I once mopped floors after a janitor no-showed. Where I taught new caregivers how to carry grief with grace. The room was full. Reporters. Clients. Staff. I stood there with no script, no makeup, no armor, and I began. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to remember. I told them about our beginnings. About folding brochures in basements and holding patients' hands. I read my mother's letter. Slowly. No theatrics, and then I looked into the camera. I'm sorry, not for reclaiming Silver R. For the imbalance that broke something between two sisters long before we knew how to fix it, but I didn't stop there. I also said this: I didn't steal this company. I rescued it, from fear. From silence, and I announced the Evelyn Carter Foundation. A non-profit named for the woman whose silence nearly cost us both everything. A program for elder care clients. With no means. Staffed by volunteers. Funded by faith. Later, my phone buzzed. An anonymous text: "Thank you for not making me the villain." I didn't need to ask who sent it. Headlines changed overnight. Emma Carter returns with humility and humanity. Centurion care renewed. Staff launched a campaign, "We stand with Emma." I didn't feel victorious. I felt free, because healing isn't performance. It's choosing truth even when it trembles in your throat. A week passed. Lauren disappeared. No press, no drama. Then, late one night, she called. "Just finished scrubbing a toilet for a blind man named Earl," she said. He cracked a joke about me being slow. There was a long pause. "Emma, I've spent years trying to outrun what I didn't get. I thought if I held enough titles, maybe I could fix the girl who still felt forgotten, but it doesn't work that way." It never did. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Just told me she saw it now. That what I was building was never about control. It was about presence. The next morning, I drove to Tacoma. No cameras. No crowd. We sat across from each other in a quiet care facility that smelled of oatmeal and antiseptic. She looked smaller. Softer. She pulled a notebook from her bag. The one we used in college, full of dreams scribbled between borrowed time and ramen noodles. "You should keep it," she said. "It belongs to both of us, but only one of us knew what to do with it." We didn't hug. We didn't make promises, but something shifted. Not between us. In her, Silver R grew again. But this time, slower. With more soul. More story. I rewrote our training. Rebuilt the culture. Planted roots that didn't come from fear. Forbes wrote about it, but barely mentioned me. That was perfect. Months later, I stood behind a podium in D.C., not to defend anything, just to give something back. I told them what mattered. That dignity comes from presence. That the real blueprint isn't policy. It's people. They clapped. I smiled. A few days later, a letter came, not asking for forgiveness. Just gratitude. "Because of you, I finally see people." I held it to my chest. That was enough. A quiet memorial. I left a single white ribbon chair empty. My mother's seat. The one she never took. The one we never offered. No one asked. They understood. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who remembers you, and why. And that day, I was remembered. Not for revenge. But for care.